Good morning. My name is Felicia, and I will be your conference operator today. At this time, I would like to welcome everyone to the PlateSpin Forge 2.0 conference call. All lines have been placed on mute to prevent any background noise. Thank you. Mr. Stedick, you may begin your conference.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone, and good afternoon to those of you joining us in Europe. And thank you very much for taking your time out of your day to join us for the PlateSpin Forge Generation 2 launch web seminar. My name is John Stedick. I'm the Director of Product Management here at PlateSpin. And today we're going to be giving you a little walkthrough about Forge and about how our PlateSpin Forge product can help you address different disaster recovery and availability scenarios, as well as give you a walkthrough of some of the new and exciting features that are available in our Forge Generation 2, not only the features, but also some of the new models that we've launched, and as well as I'm joined by my colleague Jacob David, who's going to give us a short product demo at the end of the session. As well as we wrap up, we're going to be doing a question and answer session, but before we do the Q&A, we also want to talk about a special offer that's available to webinar attendees here as it relates to getting a try and buy unit of Forge in your data center, as well as we've got a nice little giveaway for those of you that stay to the end of the conference. So we've got a nice little GPS giveaway for anyone who is still on the conference. We'll just do a random selection of the conference attendees. So hopefully everyone is logged into live meeting. You should be able to be connected and hearing me speak right now. We're going to get started. I'll review some of the procedures for actually doing question and answer submissions as we get near to the end of the actual presentation. So just quickly, for those of you not familiar with PlateSpin, so PlateSpin is a Novell company. We were acquired earlier this year by Novell, and we're part of what's called the Systems and Resource Management Business Unit at Novell. PlateSpin itself is headquartered in Toronto. We have over 7,500 customers globally, and we sell through both resellers, distributors, as well as some small direct sales as well. We have three core product families: PlateSpin Power Recon, PlateSpin Power Convert, as well as PlateSpin Forge, which of course we'll be talking about today. We focus on a variety of solutions that help you optimize and better manage the data center around server consolidation, disaster recovery, hardware migration, data center moves, all sorts of interesting solutions for you in the data center. And we'll do a quick overview of some of those other solutions throughout the presentation. As well, we've been lucky enough to be the recipient of a number of awards, and actually just recently we were announced for the second year in a row, the second fastest growing software company in Canada. So some great accolades for us in terms of the products that we've produced, as well as the company growth, as well as a rich set of partners which can enable some very interesting technical solutions in your environment. So just a quick overview for those of you not familiar with all of PlateSpin's technology. I just want to lay a little bit of groundwork, so as we talk today, you'll get an understanding of sort of where all this technology fits together and how we've actually taken all this technology and put it into some very, very useful products. So the first definition that I want to just talk about is the term server workload. I'm going to be talking a lot about this today. I'm going to be talking about server workload protection. So when we talk about a workload, really what we're talking about here is the operating system, application, and data stack. So it's the software stack that's running in your environment. In a physical world, you have one workload running on one physical machine. In a virtual world, you have multiple workloads running on one physical machine. The reason we use this term workload is because at PlateSpin, we spend a lot of time being able to help people move between physical and virtual infrastructures using virtualization as a recovery platform for your physical production workloads. So being able to use this term workload, it gives us a way of commonly identifying the software environment which will run in the data center. So we have two core technologies which actually help you manage these workloads in your environment. The first one is workload profiling. Workload profiling is an agentless technology that we've created which allows us to dynamically collect data about what's going on in the workloads, understand what their resource needs are, and be able to profile out those resource needs of your workloads. This technology is available in our Power Recon product, which is very focused on being able to help data center architects plan any data center transformation projects that they may be working on. As well as our workload portability technology essentially decouples a workload from the underlying infrastructure, whether it's physical or virtual, and allows you to stream it or move it, copy it, or replicate it to any target location. PlateSpin Forge heavily uses this workload portability technology in order to be able to replicate workloads on an incremental basis over to the Forge appliance itself. And we'll talk a little bit more about how all that works as we go through the presentation. Now, just as a quick summary of the areas that PlateSpin focuses on, so there's really 4 core solution areas that we focus on: workload relocation, protection, provisioning, and optimization and management. The relocation solutions are really focused on using Power Recon and Power Convert together to be able to plan and execute data center transformation projects, whether they're server consolidation, data center relocation, hardware migration, blade adoption, anything that requires you to figure out what your current state is, plan out different options for your future state, and then actually be able to execute the project to be able to move workloads into a new environment, essentially executing a data center transformation project. The next solution area that we focus on around is workload protection. There's really 2 areas in workload protection. One is around image capture and image restore. The other one is what we call consolidated recovery. And most of our time today is going to be focused on this consolidated recovery solution. Consolidated recovery is about using virtualization as a recovery resource for your production workloads, whether they're running in a physical environment or in a virtual environment. And Forge is very, very well suited for doing this. The next solution area is around provisioning, being able to rapidly provision out new systems from a common gold image. Again, our workload portability technology combined with what we call our PlateSpin flexible images gives us the ability to deploy out images out into a physical environment, a virtualized environment. It doesn't matter, across different hardware platforms. You can have one gold image of a workload which can be deployed out across infrastructure. So it gives you a nice, very flexible and common provisioning mechanism. Finally, optimization and management solution sets really revolve around being able to do ongoing optimization in your environment, continuously understanding what you have in your environment and continuously moving workloads around your environment across physical and virtual boundaries to really balance out your workload demand with your resource supply. We also go into specific solutions around VM management, being able to help you with sprawl reporting, VM chargeback, things that are really necessary to help you grow your use of virtualization in the data center. So that just gives everyone on the call a little bit of a broad overview of some of the technologies and products that PlateSpin has to offer. And today our focus is going to be on the consolidated recovery area around our workload protection solutions. So let's talk about the state of disaster recovery right now, just to sort of lay out the current state of the market and what some of the challenges are that we hear from customers. So the first piece has to do with actually being able to allocate out your disaster recovery budget. Typically what happens is you end up spending the majority of your money on your top tier servers. You're spending on expensive solutions that can be quite sophisticated and provide very, very rich functionality, but they're very costly, very advanced to set up, require special knowledge, and also have a higher ongoing maintenance cost. What ends up happening is you end up spending about 20% of your resources to protect you end up spending about 80% of your dollars to protect about 20% of your resources. And what ends up happening is then your lower part of your budget is really left to be able to spread across many, many servers. The challenge here is that the lower tier of servers end up underinsured, and in some cases the higher tier of servers end up overinsured because you've had to build a more sophisticated solution than what was really needed for these servers. The other piece that we're starting to see is really this collision between disaster recovery and high availability. In a high availability world, it focuses on fast RTO, so recovery time objective, and RPO, recovery point objective. It's typically local automated failover, requires duplicate resources, and it can be costly and complex to set up. But it does give you very good RTO, again, recovery time objective, how long it takes you to recover a workload, and very good recovery point objective, essentially how much data loss. The lower the recovery point objective, the lower the data loss you're going to suffer. Whereas disaster recovery usually has slower recovery time and recovery point objectives. It allows you to be geographically dispersed. It also allows for an overcommitment of recovery resources, meaning that you can have in your production site 400 servers, but maybe in your recovery site you only have 100 servers. You can then pick and choose at disaster recovery time which workloads you actually want to be able to recover. So what we're starting to see, though, is this merger between both high availability and disaster recovery, where essentially if a workload is worth deploying, it's actually worth protecting. And so what people want to be able to do is easily recover all their workloads and start to get high availability-like functionality across all their workloads. But of course, many high availability solutions today are not cost effective to allow you to be able to do that. In the past, too, there was also some technical limitations which limited you from being able to protect an entire workload. What we're starting to see is that with next generation technologies, you start to have a much better cost per disk, so you start to be able to move to more online or nearline storage and move away from tape. You have lower bandwidth constraints, so you're actually able to replicate entire workloads across a wide area network. And as well as virtualization has introduced some very interesting capabilities to be able to encapsulate a workload either in a production environment, but more specifically be able to overcommit your resources in a recovery environment, which allows you to then get a much higher consolidation ratio in your recovery environment, meaning that you spend less money in building out a recovery environment yourself. Now let's take a look at the state of recovery today and where its focus typically is. Right now, the majority of recovery and data protection solutions are really based on some sort of tape solution, and they focus purely on data protection. So really, tape has its own headaches. It's a physical media that needs to be managed. You need to swap out tapes, archive those tapes. It really gives you a data-only view of the world as well. This is really a challenge because in today's world, the workloads that you're running are quite sophisticated, and the fact that you've got a backup of the database file is great, but really what you need is a backup of the entire workload to bring that system back online. As well, because it has a data-only view of the world, typically what happens to be able to recover a workload, you need to reinstall the operating system, reinstall the applications, configure everything, and then restore the data. Because of this, it takes a long time to restore. There's manual processes involved. There's a run book that you have to go through and flip through, check up all the processes. And because it's manual, it's typically error-prone. And in the event of a disaster, when you're in a real critical outage situation, tensions are running high, and the chances for making mistakes are even greater. Because it's also slow to restore, it's also very slow to do the testing. A lot of times people don't like having to do the recovery testing. This takes a lot of time. It's things they have to do on weekends. They're usually not able to complete it in the allotted time that they've set aside for it. And so it becomes a very challenging task which people don't like to do. Because it's challenging, people don't like to do it very often, and it doesn't get done very well. So ultimately, in the end, well, although you may have backups of your data, the thing is the question you need to ask yourself is, how well can I actually recover? What's my recovery risk? And the real question is how well protected are you? So let's take a look at the new state of recovery in terms of what some things that PlateSpin can offer you. So first of all, we move away from disk and move to disk-to-disk replication. So being able to actually replicate workloads, storing them on media that actually can be used. This is actually, as I mentioned before, this is of course more cost effective because the cost of disk is dropping dramatically. This gives you random access to the data you need at any time, so you can just simply boot up the workload and pull out the files you need. It's not a case of doing a big manual restore process. It also removes manual handling of tapes. There's no more barcoding and indexing and throwing them in cases and shipping them off-site. As well, too, because we focus on protecting the entire workload, it's not just about protecting the data, it's about protecting the entire workload. So it protects the data and the system, so the operating systems and application. So this really ensures both stateful and stateless servers are protected equally well as it also allows for a very effective recovery process. It also allows you to protect any changes that happen in the workload, whether it's a case of applying new patches or updates or application configuration changes. Those all get protected as well. As I mentioned, it allows for simple restore as well. Because you're replicating an entire workload into a running environment, we enable you the ability to actually do a full one-click restore capability and just bring that workload up and running. Because we make it easy to restore, it's also very easy to do testing. So you can actually test out your workloads very quickly and isolate them from your production environment and be able to test out your environment and test out your recovery process. Because it's easy to do the testing, you typically do it more often. Because you do your testing more often, you can actually feel confident that your recovery process is working well and that your workloads are actually very well protected. And additionally, you can even prove it through some of our reporting infrastructure, which I'll talk to in a moment. But finally, I just want to sort of put where consolidated recovery fits in the scale of different solutions for disaster recovery and availability. So down at the bottom, we have the typical tape manual rebuild, and we've talked about some of the challenges of that. It's a low-cost, well-understood solution, but it definitely does have some limitations. It's difficult to administer and test. It's slow, and it's prone to errors. It also gives you lower recovery time and recovery point objectives than you might typically want in today's more modern workloads. You can then move on to moving away from tape and a manual rebuild into more of an image capture scenario. With image capture, essentially what you're doing is you're capturing a copy of the entire workload. So in the event of recovery, you have a copy of the entire workload. You can push it out into a new environment to recover it. The challenge with image capture is that you have to do just that. You have to push out the image into a new environment, which means you need to have that environment there. It needs to be available. You need to typically have similar hardware resources so you can deploy those images out, as well as your recovery time. Recovery point objectives typically more sit around the 1 hour time, or excuse me, the 1 day time for recovery point objective, and it can sometimes take hours to deploy out a new image depending where you're deploying it to in your network and so forth. As well, this chart introduces the concept of TTO, which is really another metric around disaster recovery, which is your test time objective. How long does it actually take you to test the recovery? With image capture, because the images are sitting in an offline store and actually need to be pushed out somewhere in order to be able to be tested, it then means that your test time is quite lengthy. If we jump right to the top and take a look at server clustering, what you'll see here is server clustering obviously is the traditional way of looking at this, where you have a fairly expensive set of resources. There are duplicate resources. They're more costly to administer. It takes an advanced configuration. But their recovery time and recovery point objectives give you near zero recovery point and recovery time objectives. And as well as your test time objectives can be near zero. However, because you're basically doing a switch between the clustered nodes, or depending what type of environment you're running, whether you're running active-active or active-passive, essentially doing that testing in a recovery or in a clustering environment really adds production risk because you're actually switching over and failing over real production workloads. So those testing phases can be risky, and if something goes wrong, you can take down your production system itself. So that gives you a little overview of what some of the challenges are today in the data center when it comes to actually doing workload protection. So what I want to do now is talk about PlateSpin Forge and actually give people an overview of some of the way the product's structured, some of its features, and then we'll get into some of the new and exciting features that we've added in Forge Generation 2. So for those of you familiar with Forge, this should be a little bit of a review for you. So first of all, Forge is really the world's first disaster recovery hardware appliance with embedded virtualization. So you can protect up to 25 workloads straight out of the box. So it's a case of taking a Forge out of the box, racking it, plugging it in, selecting what workloads you want to protect, and pressing go. Included in Forge is actually all the storage you need, the compute resources. There's an embedded hypervisor in Forge, a PlateSpin management VM, and essentially then a big set of disks, which is the replication repository, where each workload that you're protecting out in your production environment is replicated into Forge. So essentially what you get with Forge is that you get a full backup repository where you get whole workload protection. So you get copies of all of your workloads stored in Forge. But because they're stored inside of a virtual machine in Forge, they can actually then be run at any time. So not only with Forge do you get a backup repository, you also get a recovery resource, or really a recovery lab in a box, if you can think of it that way. What's important to note as well, in your production environment, your workloads can be physical machines, they can be virtual machines. It doesn't matter. Forge is especially useful in environments maybe where you have a set of physical machines which can't be run in a physical or in a virtual world. You want to be able to protect them. They're fine to run in a virtual world in a recovery environment, but the production environment just doesn't allow you to run them in a virtual machine. As well, Forge is a great solution if you're running a mixed physical and virtualized environment where you can actually have the same workload protection strategy for both your physical machines and your virtual machines, really allowing you to reduce the type of silo technologies that you'd have to bring in where your physical machines are protected one way and your virtual machines are protected another way. So let's dive in and talk about some of the features of Forge itself, and then as we get into the demo, Jacob and I will illustrate some of these features as we go throughout the demo. So the first piece is around consolidated recovery. So Forge essentially gives you a 25-to-1 recovery environment, allowing you to replicate workloads into one Forge appliance, giving you whole workload protection, one-click workload failover, and as well then minimizing or really removing your redundant infrastructure costs. Typically what happens if you look at building out any type of replication solution, you usually have to have a 1-to-1 ratio of the resources. So if you're running 10 physical servers in your production environment, if you want to be able to fail those over easily and have dedicated resources for them, you need to have 10 physical machines running in your secondary environment. Forge removes the need to do that by allowing you to essentially have this 25-to-1 consolidation environment. As well, because we're replicating into offline virtual machines, it also removes the needs for a secondary operating system licenses, applications, as well as then maintenance that would need to be done to those systems. So if you don't have any secondary systems to patch or applications to upgrade, licenses to manage. Moving on, we talked a lot about testing, and testing is really one of the core key features of PlateSpin Forge. We've made testing really a first-class notion in Forge itself. It allows you to actually leverage some of the internal virtual networking that is available in hypervisor technologies to be able to actually bring up workloads, run them in Forge, but have them isolated from a network standpoint from your production environment. So this means you can actually run your production environment at the same time while you're actually testing out your recovery. As well, the testing is logged for reporting and compliance. So anytime that someone actually executes a test and says, test my failover, the user can actually go in, take a look at the workload, work with the workload, and say, yes, this test is passed. Check that off, and we'll actually log the fact that the test passed. Then historically, you can run monthly or quarterly reports that will show each time a workload was tested, the workload recovery was tested, who tested it, and whether the test was successful. And as, of course, as I had mentioned, being able to isolate the testing of the recovery workload so it doesn't interfere with your production environment. Next off, we talk about rapid failover and flexible failback. So in the event of a failure, so say, for example, this internal web server goes down, we're able to then run the workload itself right on Forge. And Forge can either be at a local site. This is to be able to implement essentially operational recovery. So if your internal web server goes down, you can just run it on Forge, or you can run Forge at a remote site, giving you essentially disaster recovery. So if the entire site goes down, you're able to run most of your workloads on Forge itself. So you're able to actually fail over to Forge, but then, of course, once the workloads are actually running in Forge, now what you want to be able to do is easily return those workloads back to the production environment once you've actually fully recovered from the disaster and your production environment is back up and running. So you can simply stream the workloads that are running on Forge, stream them back out to any type of hardware resource you want, whether it's this similar physical machine or maybe moving it out to another virtual machine server. Again, because Forge is built on our workload portability technology, you can move these workloads really wherever you want, whenever you want. As well, in terms of a failover scenario, what we've actually done is we've created what we call a prepare for failover, and this really accelerates the failover process. So just to get into some of the technical details as to what Forge actually does when it recovers a workload or when it fails over a workload and is running in Forge, what we do is we actually take that virtual machine, we do some low-level configuration to make it actually run inside the virtualized environment, and then actually boot it up. And the VM will boot up, come online, and then start working. That process can take anywhere from 5 to 15 minutes, depending on the server and how long it takes to recover. So what we've actually introduced is this concept called prepare for failover. So you can find out that one of your workloads has gone down, and Forge has built-in alerting, which I'll talk to you in a moment. You can find out that your workload has gone down, and then instead of doing a full failover, which will switch all your production users over to that new environment, you can do a prepare for failover. What this does is it does all the preparation for the workload, gets it up and running on Forge, but isolates it from the network, essentially puts a fence around it, so production users aren't quite hitting it yet. Once you've established that, yes, this is a real failure, and you want to actually move all your production users over to the secondary environment, you essentially can execute what we call go live, which basically drops the fence around that workload, brings it online, so it's now running in your production environment. So really this is all about being able to accelerate failover. So you can actually run in parallel both the time it takes to bring the workload up in a Forge environment, as well as then validating that, yes, this was a real failure and I actually want to fail over this system. So some great little pieces of functionality that just make it that much easier to do this type of failover. And I had spoken about alerting capabilities. So Forge gives you visibility into what's going on really in two different ways. One is visibility as to what's going on in the system currently, and that's through alerting. So there's a full email alerting mechanism which can alert you when workloads are going offline, or if there's been failures in replication, maybe due to a network outage or whatever the case might be. So actually the workload failure notification is really interesting. You can actually receive an email, you can get it right on your BlackBerry, say for example, if you wanted. There's a link that can actually say, okay, I want to actually fail over this workload, or I want to prepare to fail over. You can actually do that right from your BlackBerry. So as complete remote access through your mobile device to be able to recover these workloads even when you're not on site. So very, very helpful. As well, not only do we gain visibility into what's going on immediately with Forge and proactively alerting you, you can also then do historic visibility through our reporting infrastructure. So with Forge, we have a number of reports that show you how well protected your workloads are, what's your recovery time, your recovery point objectives, what your targets and your actuals are, what your replication windows are, how much data is being transferred on each replication. You can view this over different time periods, average, look at the maximum, as well as also build out compliance reports to show how well protected the workload is. So this is a great report to say, okay, here are each of the workloads. Here's each of the replications that were done, when the last incremental was done, when the last full was done. Here's when the last test was done, who did it, and so forth. So again, giving you a lot of visibility as to what's going on and essentially allowing you to build out really key performance indicators for your disaster recovery and availability plans. So just in quick summary, some of the core functionality here of Forge, being able to give you consolidated recovery, simplifying your testing procedure, giving you advanced failover and very flexible failback, and gaining visibility through alerting and reporting. Some great features of Forge itself. So now let's move on to what's new in Forge 2.0. We're really quite excited about Forge, or Forge Generation 2, about all the new features that we've added into this. What we found is, since Forge has been in the market now for about 8-9 months now, in working with a lot of our customers, there's some great customer-generated ideas, and as well as some things that we've had on our product roadmap. So our Forge Generation 2 really starts to step things forward and starts to realize a lot of the vision of Forge itself. So the first piece is around SAN integration. One of the comments that we heard from customers was that I really like this Forge idea, and I want this in my environment. Forge itself comes with 2.5 terabytes of storage in it. In a lot of cases, people were saying, well, I already have a lot of storage in my environment. I already have a full SAN environment, and whether it's Fiber Channel or iSCSI, and so I want to be able to actually use this in my environment, but I want to be able to connect Forge to my SAN environment. So we've created SAN environment, which really allows you to grow how much storage you have available to Forge. So it allows you also leverage your existing investments in your SAN infrastructure. So as I mentioned, you can get Forge either with an iSCSI connector or a Fiber Channel connector, where it can then just plug into your existing storage environment. As well, we've also introduced a concept called recovery points, which really allows you to be able to roll back in time when you're doing a recovery. So you set up your incremental schedules to be replicating every hour, every 4 hours, every day, whatever the case might actually be, and then you can choose what your archiving policy is going to be, how many of those recovery points you actually want to keep. So then in the event of failure, you can pick and choose where you want to fail back to. This is also helpful from a data recovery point of view. If a mistake is made or a file is deleted, you can simply just do a test restore, bring that workload back up and running at a former point in time, and pull that file out. As well, when you're actually failing back workloads and restoring them back to their original environment, you can actually pick and choose which recovery points you want to fail back to. The common use case for this is if the workload actually gets corrupted, maybe say through a virus or some sort of application error or human error in configuration, and that error or that virus gets replicated over into your secondary environment, you want to be able to roll back before that error actually happens. So of course now Forge has built in what we call recovery points. We'll give a short demo of those today as well. Finally, we've also introduced what we call our central management console. As Forge has been used in more and more environments and people are going beyond protecting just 25 workloads, Forge actually gives you now the ability to see multiple appliances. So each of these boxes each represent one appliance, which then you can see in the individual state of each of the workloads on those appliances. Again, giving you a single pane of glass about all the workloads that are being protected across an entire Forge environment. This can also be run geographically dispersed as well. So I think in the demo we'll actually take a look at an environment where we have multiple Forge appliances in different geographical areas, and you can see all those different geographical areas. This is really helpful if you have a multi-site environment, and maybe Houston acts as a recovery environment for California, and they're replicating between each other. So you have one Forge appliance sitting in one location and a Forge appliance sitting in the other location. Through a centralized console, you can see all of those workloads. So that gives a quick overview of the new features of Forge 2.0, so the SAN integration, being able to do recovery points, and as well as the central management console. As well, there's some nice underlying performance improvements that we've made, making the system a little bit snappier, making the replication speeds faster, as well as added in some functionality to be able to allow you to to sync up separate workloads if you want to be able to easily set up an off-site replication. So some great functionality when it comes to just making Forge easier to implement in your environment. So I'm going to turn it over to the product demo right now, and Jacob's going to join me on the line here to be able to actually walk you through some of the Forge environment. So I'll just give you a quick walkthrough of what we're going to be taking a look at here. So Jacob and I are going to be showing you what it takes to actually add workloads in your environment, how you would interact with the system, what type of things you can configure when you're protecting workloads, as well as taking a look at some of the reporting and some of the different replication options. So Jacob, why don't you just take a few minutes and just give us a quick overview of what we're looking at here. This is the Forge dashboard that the user would work with.
Absolutely, John. Good morning, everyone. So what we're seeing right now is basically the Forge dashboard, which just like in your car, gives you an overview of everything that you need to see within the system. So if you look over here on the left side where it says one protected, one failed, and one underprotected, this is the section that shows each and every workload and the current state. For example, I have one workload called LA file server, which is protected, and I can see below it there is another New York SQL server that actually failed. Failed, which means that the workload is no longer responding to the Forge keep alive signals. And of course, below it you can see the underprotected, the workload, which is currently protected, but the schedule is not running for any reason. And just below it you can see the workload summary, which basically gives you a quick overview of the entire workload being protected by Forge. And just hovering the mouse over this circles, you can see exactly the workload name, and clicking on each and every workload will basically give you a detailed overview of this current workload and it's protected. And below it you can see the storage information, how much available space you have on your current storage. It can be either local or your SAN storage. And on the right side you can see all the latest and upcoming tasks and events that are occurring right now on the system.
All right, that's great, Jacob. So really with the dashboard, I can log in and I can, like you said, it's like a car dashboard. I can see everything that's going on. I can see the current state of my workloads, and I can see anything that Forge needs me to perform. It's sort of like my to-do list here with Forge. So let's take a look at adding a workload. So I mentioned to people, really, you take Forge out of the box, you rack it, you plug it in, you log in, you configure it, and then you just start adding your workload. So how does the user actually go about adding a workload?
Absolutely. Once the user configures the Forge appliance, then the first thing he needs to do is actually add a workload. Basically, this process is very simple. All you need to do is provide the hostname or the IP address of this particular workload, and of course with the user credentials. And once you click Add, it will immediately start discovering the details of this workload. That includes all the current services, the workload, the operating system, the service pack, and everything that Forge needs to know about protecting this workload. So once I click on Add, several minutes later, this workload will show up. For example, right now I have a workload I just added, but you can see the replication status is unprotected. And by the way, right now I'm looking at it under the workload page, which basically is your command center for Forge. Here you execute and do all the actions that Forge allows you to do by just clicking a workload, the checkbox near it, and below it you can see all the workload command that will allow you to do manipulation and protection on this particular workload. For example, I have New York file server I just discovered, and I'm going to check this box and click Configure Protection. And what you see right now is basically the main screen of configuring it. You're going to do it only once for each workload, and of course you can always go back and change settings within the protection. But over here, you can actually decide how often to protect the workload, and that's under the tier settings. You can use custom, basically give you free-form settings. You can enter any setting that you like, but you can create multiple settings with different time and settings, and you can apply them for individual or groups workloads.
So really, these protection tiers are sort of like it's defining your business policy as to how you actually want to protect your workload. So really, right now, we have configured hourly, nightly, weekly. You could set this up as your gold, silver, and bronze protection tier, and then associate different replication schedules with those.
Exactly. So basically, once you create a workload protection tier, you just select, for example, I'm going to select for this particular workload, I want to protect it every day at 1 a.m. So selecting that basically gives me the incremental application of every day at 12. So whoever created that made a mistake with his clock. But of course, I can use the custom, and here I can define everything. Just a quick review of what we're seeing here. This is the protection failure detection in the system of the forge. So basically, you can define how often under the workload detection, every 60 seconds, for example, and how many failures will the forge will tolerate until send me, the administrator, an alert and will report that the system is offline. So everything here is configurable.
So I'm really able to kind of configure how often machines are replicated, how quickly I want to be alerted about different failures. So it's really focused on really sort of setting the criticality of that workload, really.
Absolutely. And just one more thing. Over here, you can see the recovery points. So the recovery point, like we said, gives you the ability to create multiple recovery points of the system, and then in case of disaster or if you lost a file for some reason, you can go back in point of time and then restore the system or do a test restore the system from that particular point of time. And below it, there are the replication setting options. So here we offer 3 different protocols for protecting the workload. We have the file-based protocol, which basically allows you to copy the entire system file by file. And of course, the system is also aware of Exchange and SQL services. So during the replication, we'll stop the services for the duration of replication and then restart them after that. Below which we can see one of our latest protocol, which is a snapshot based on Microsoft's volume shadow copy. Of course, all applications that are supported by VSS will not be stopped, and we're going to be able to copy the files without stopping the services. For example, Exchange or any other VSS supported applications such as SQL. And below it, we have our block-based protocol, which basically considered by many customers as the premium option, which basically the big difference between the block and the other protocol is when changes occur. For example, you have a 500 megabytes SQL server file, and if a change occurs to this file, with file and snapshot protocols, we'll copy the entire file. However, in block-based protocol, we'll copy only the change block. So this block will be used a lot when you do, for example, WAN migration, when you have to be very cautious with the amount of data you're copying across the wire. But the only thing that you need to be aware of the block-based, it is a kernel driver. So during the installation of this driver, the system will reboot. And we give the user the option of when to install the driver. So you'll always be aware when you install the driver, and you can do it during the maintenance window of the system. And just below it, you can see the replication network. Forge offers several networks to use. So you can configure the appliance to connect to multiple locations. For example, I have replication network dedicated only for replications. I have production networks that I can use in case of a disaster. I can fail over the workload into the production network. And of course, I have internal and external test network when I do my testing. So I can run multiple workloads with the same network to ensure that everything works as I want it to work. And of course, you can select where to store the recovery points. So here we can see where, which storage are available. For example, I have a local storage and I have my SAN storage. So I can select where to store all the recovery points. And below it, of course, you can see all the volumes to protect. So you can select which volume you can protect. For example, on this system, the E drive is connected to SAN. So there's no point for me to replicate that data across the wire again. So basically, I'm going to uncheck the E drive. And that will give me the option just to protect the system. So the system will be bootable in case of a disaster. And after the disaster, I can redirect the system exactly to the SAN. And of course, I can also use resizing. If I want to increase or decrease the amount of free space on the system, I can do so at any time. And of course, if I want to stop specific services when I do file snapshot-based protocols, I can add services to stop. For example, I have some services that, for example, unique protocol or application that I'm running, and I want to make sure that every time I'm replicating it, it's going to stop and flash everything into the disk. So by selecting a specific file and changing its status will give me the option of controlling everything within the system, and of course, once the replication is ending, the service will be started again. The next setting is the failover setting. So over here, I'll just basically define what settings the workload will boot when a failover occurs, when I want to run a failover. For example, we're using the default setting of the workload during the add workload process. So this system had 1.2 gigabytes of RAM, but I can increase that. For example, I want to have 2 or even lower than that. So that's fully controllable by the user. And of course, the host name and the workgroup or domain association will be kept, and we can always change that for some reason if you decide. So you have free control on everything during a failover. And of course, below it, the network settings. So by default, we always use the network setting of the workload we're protecting. So for example, this workload I added had a static IP address, and I can select which virtual network on the hypervisor will be used. And of course, if I want to change the network settings, I can do so freely. And of course, there's also the option of stop specific services on the appliance once the workload is being a failover state. Why would you do that? For example, if you have a specific hardware related, so let's say I'm protecting a physical server which has a very unique vendor-specific service that run only on physical hardware. It's not going to work in the virtual environment, so I have full control to stop that service when I'm doing a failover. And below it, we can see the prepare for failover setting. Basically, the prepare for failover, John mentioned, basically allows you to prepare the workload in case of a notification that the system has failed and you're not sure what happened to the system. So you can prepare the workload, for example, in the internal environment. This will make sure that the workload will boot into an isolated environment and prevent any conflict with the rest of the network and, of course, the original workload in case it will boot back during the test prepare for failover. And the last section is for the testing information. Over here you can see it's basically the same setting as the default setting of the workload, but you can change that, you can add it or remove it or change specific setting just to make sure that your testing is working properly the way you want it to work. And once I'm done, I'll just click Save and Prepare and the system will be protected.
Wow, so that's a lot of great configuration flexibility. So really, it seems like you get to choose the criticality of the workload, so what your protection tiers are. You get to choose how you want to replicate it and where it should get replicated to, as well as then any specific details about services you may want to manage during the replication. But as well, it also seems like you're really able to capture the whole recovery process, what IP addresses, host names you want to use, the recovery process and the test process, so all of that can actually be stored in Forge. And that's really why it makes it so easy to recover a workload. It's just a single click because you don't need to change any configuration settings at recovery time.
That's correct. And let me just show, for example, I just want to use that workload over here that actually just failed. And what I want to do a failover because it failed. So I need to bring that system immediately online. So I'm clicking on a failover. And John said it's one-click failover. Of course, you don't want to have a one-click failover. We don't have a oops moment. So before I'm going to run this failover system, I have the option of selecting which recovery point in time I can restore into. So over here you can see I have 4 different recovery points. I just want to revert to that one because I know I had some problem with the last replication. And once I'm done, I'm clicking execute. And from this immediate moment, the system will start the configuration process. And within a few minutes, it will be online and available to provide services of the original system.
Great. Okay, so let's take a look at, we saw the sort of the tasks on the dashboard, so we got a sense of that the failures occurred. Of course, you have the main tasks interface as well, too, where you can see really your to-do list of things to do. So this all talks about sort of the operational activity of Forge as to what's going on with it right now. Let's talk a little bit about being able to view things historically from a reporting infrastructure. Can you maybe bring up a report or two that will just give us a little bit of visibility as to what's actually going on with the different workflow protection that we have?
Absolutely. So this is the report section in Forge. Basically, it gives you a visibility of everything that occurs currently and in the past with the Forge appliance. For example, the favorite report is the current protection status. This is a report that basically gives you an overview of all the current workload being protected and all the important information such as RPO, actual RPO, TTO, and RTO. So over here, what you're looking at, just I want to put a side note, this is a frozen time demo system, so you'll see some wacky numbers showing up here. For example, the target RPO. The target RPO is a store point objective. So how often will you protect the system? For example, I have a system that is protected every day or nightly, so that's my target RPO. But since this is a demo system, it's been frozen in time. It's been almost 40 days since the last time I actually run a recovery incremental. So I'm way behind my RPO. So in this point, I will go back and run incremental just to keep up with my target. Of course, if you're running a regular schedule, it's always going to be synchronized with the target and the actual. Over here, you can see the actual TTO. The actual TTO and actual RTO are basically linked together. So once I run a test failover, the system will boot. And so I have my acceptance testing. For example, for this workload, I managed to test the system and ensure it's operating the way I wanted to operate within 12 minutes. But during this job, it took the Forge appliance to boot the system within 6 minutes and wait for my inspection. So this is the recovery time objective that we're talking about. So you can see it's indeed minutes because the system has unique technology that allows you to boot system really fast into running state. And of course, more visibility into the test failover. You can see when is the last time I ran a test failover and now what is the test age. So again, where it's been a long time since I run test, and I can run a test at any point of time without interfering with the production. So you can run tests any month, every day, every week.
So Jacob, if I'm looking at this report right now, we realize this is a point-in-time demo system, but if I notice that I wanted to run tests every 30 days and I see this one's 39 days, am I able to then just drill directly into that workload right off of this report?
Yes, basically you can go into that workload by clicking specifically on this particular workload. For example, let's take this server. So this is a server, for example, it's offline. So I can see exactly what is the setting of this workload, what protection tier it's using, what's the interval detection. So I can always go back and, like I said, at any point you can go and edit the settings and rechange the setting of this workload protection.
Okay, great. So now, back on the report, so that gave us a good overview of how each of those workloads are protected. Are you able to also show us here the sort of things around replication windows and how long it takes to replicate each thing and how much data is transferred? Of course, this is really important as people are looking to be able to do planning across the WAN. How could someone see how long it actually takes to run a replication across their environment?
Absolutely. We have several replication information reports. For example, the replication history. Here you can actually drill down on a specific workload. For example, let this take workload and run, I want to see what the current tier offers to this workload. So you can see all the information. When was the first incremental? Of course, I have several more pages of information. But you can see the type of the job. So I had an incremental job running here, and the size of the incremental was 17 megabytes. And it took about 16 seconds to copy that incremental, and this is the speed. So you can get a really good sense of what's incremental and the full application information in each every minute. So you can see, for example, I managed to copy almost 4 gigabytes of data in 9 minutes, which is really impressive speed across the wire. So I can pick and choose any workload, and I can drill down to see exactly what's incremental, and I can do more planning around it depending on the bandwidth, if I have bandwidth limitation in my live. Another report that actually shows that is the replication window. Let me just switch to the current tier. And you can see better information of exactly more average. So you can actually create a lot of reports for management, and most recent, the sum and peak. So for example, I'm looking at each and every workload, and I can see the average speed of the full, the incremental, and the average time. So you really get a big visibility into your network and into replication of each and every workload that is protected by PlateSpin Forge.
Great. We can see there, too, we're obviously utilizing the bandwidth of a gigabit network as well, too. We're transferring at 248 megabits per second. So that's great to see that we're able to hit those or be able to use the bandwidth that's available to us.
Absolutely.
So just quickly, we're going to get started on the Q&A session here in a moment. Just quickly, can you give us a quick overview? So if someone wants to roll out, they've got 100 workloads they want to protect. They're going to roll out 4 Forge appliances. How can they see across all of those appliances?
Absolutely. For that, we have the PlateSpin console. Basically, the PlateSpin console, what you see right now is the ability to control multiple Forge appliances that can be geographically displaced across the world, as long as you have a very HTTP connection or HTTPS Forge connection to that particular Forge appliance. So over here you can see I'm controlling multiple Forge appliances. I'm going to get a visibility of each. Basically, it's a snapshot of the Forge dashboard. So I can see the workload being protected. I can see where it's located, and I can see exactly if I want to drill down into a report. I'm just basically clicking on each and every setting, and I can go into that particular server. So that application basically is your focal point of controlling all the Forge appliances you have in your environment. And of course, when you do offsite protection of a workload, you can do that and control the particular Forge without going into each and every Forge appliance individually.
Yeah, so now if I actually want to find a workload, but I don't know what Forge appliance it's on, is there a way that I can do that? If I know the host name of the workload that I'm on, can I actually do that?
Absolutely. Over here you can see select workloads, so you can see exactly all the workloads. We have a multiple workload here, again, it's demo environment, but by clicking on a particular workload, I can select that and just go directly to that workload, or I can just highlight a workload particularly here. For example, I want to go to that particular workload. Clicking go will take me basically to the same page as if I was clicking on that particular workload from the Forge appliance. And from there, I can actually go and start editing the workload setting with regards to protection tier, and any other setting that Forge basically allows me to control.
All right, well, that's great. Thanks, Jacob. I think we've got a good overview as to how Forge works, what some of the new features are. Again, we talked about the recovery points and the SAN integration. Some people, you probably noticed the ability to select multiple data stores as to where you might want to put your workloads, as well as, of course, then we finished off with the management console. So hopefully everyone got a good overview of actually what's happening with Forge. So just very quickly, I also wanted to talk about some of the new models that we've introduced. So we've expanded the product line family with Forge, where you're actually able to now have there's two core families now. There's the Forge 300 series and then the Forge 500 series. So the 300 series is really focused on being a storage gateway. So this can come with an iSCSI fiber channel connector. It's in a 1U form factor, and it can come in either a 10 or 25 workload model. So really on the 300 series, there's not really a lot of built-in storage. If you want to be able to have your recovery resources or your recovery repository, you would connect that into an existing storage environment. Or maybe you can pick up an iSCSI device to be able to connect directly to Forge, giving you the ability to have lots and lots of storage beyond the 2.5 terabytes. Now the 500 series is really the all-in-one appliance. It's got 2.5 terabytes of onboard storage. You also have the option of having iSCSI or fiber channel if you want to be able to expand the amount of storage that it has available. This comes in a 2U form factor, and again, either in the 10 or 15 workload model. And so this gives you lots of choices as to how to best build out your environment, as well as also the 10 workload models. You can start with a 10 workload model, then you can buy expansion licenses to get you up to the 25 workload model as well. So just a quick overview of now the new Forge Generation 2 product lineup. So let's talk about some of the special offers here available to people attending the webinar today. So what we're finding is a lot of people get some use out of actually having Forge in their environment, getting it installed, racking it, starting to protect their workloads, and really understanding how well it works in their environment. So we, in North America, we have what we call our try and buy program, and then in Europe, we also have the ability to get demo units into your environment if Forge, you feel, is a solution that is going to work well for you. So obviously the Forge appliance includes the storage or application software, all the management interfaces, the embedded hypervisor, everything you really need. So if you're interested in actually taking a look at getting one of these units in your environment, we encourage you to go visit platespin.com/getforge, and you can actually register there, and that'll fire off a note to one of our accounts team, be able to get you engaged in the Forge evaluation or try and buy program. As well as I had mentioned, we're going to be doing a draw for a GPS. I want to take a couple questions just in the last few minutes, and then we'll do a draw for the GPS as well. So if we take a look at some of the questions here, so there was a couple questions about what operating systems are supported. So Forge today currently supports Windows 2000 and above for operating systems. Jacob had talked about the Microsoft volume shadow copy services. That's of course available in Windows 2003 and above, and then as well with our block-based transfer, we can support Windows 2000, Windows 2003. Windows 2008 support will be coming out in our next major release, as well as we'll also start to introduce Linux replication functionality as well next year. So there are some questions around replicating Exchange and SQL. Typically what customers will do will use the block-based replication to actually replicate those Exchange servers and actively protect those Exchange and SQL servers using our block-based replication. In terms of the embedded hypervisor, we currently have ESX 3.5 embedded into the environment. So for those of you familiar with ESX, it's a great way to be able to just link directly into your environment. There's some other questions about being able to use it with Zen Server 4.1. Obviously, Forge itself is an all-in-one package, so the hypervisor is it's hidden, so to speak. You don't really need to know a lot of details about the hypervisor, and today it is a VMware hypervisor. Look for some future announcements for us in terms of expanding support for different types of hypervisors to be able to use those hypervisors as recovery resources in your environment. So there's a couple questions about WAN for DR. So the WAN replication really does depend on the type of WAN that you actually have. We've spent a lot of time to be able to optimize our replication protocols to work at high latency networks. So you're going to, of course, in a WAN, as your latency goes up, in a lot of cases, depending on the type of protocol, your actual transfer speeds start to drop off dramatically. As I mentioned, we spend a lot of time optimizing this, so you see a very minimal drop-off of replication speeds due to pure latency. Really, the replication speed drop-off is going to be seen only due to bandwidth constraints. We have a number of customers that they'll put Forge in a production environment, replicate their first set of workloads into Forge, and then ship Forge off to its secondary environment, and then actually link up the workloads and start replicating them across the wire that way. This is a new feature that we've actually fully enabled in Forge Generation 2 to allow people to do that. So there's a question here, we currently run PlateSpin Power Convert. What's the process to upgrade to Forge? So if Forge is a solution that you are interested in, and the all-in-one packaging is something that you like, I suggest you go onto the website, go to platespin.com/getforge, register your information, and a salesperson can reach out to you and talk to you specifically about your needs and where you're taking your specific project. There's a question here, so how long does an initial replication take if you've got an 80 gig file across a LAN or a WAN? Of course, the question also goes on to say, I know there's several variables, network speed and so forth. It really does depend on the density of the file system, how much of the file system is actually used, what your latency is, what your bandwidth is, and so forth. But you can typically see on a standard 100 megabit LAN, you can easily see speeds of 50 megabits per second. And once you move into a gigabit network, if you're replicating locally, you can far exceed the 100 megabits and start to get up to close to 300 megabits per second in transfer speeds. Then again, the amount of time it takes to transfer is really just solely dependent on how much data you're actually transferring. So there's a question, so how do you attach SAN storage? Is it through the VIC client? So yeah, for those of you that are familiar with ESX, what you would do is actually attach the SAN storage using the VIC client, and then create another data store attached to the hypervisor that's in Forge. Then when you go into the Forge interface, you'll see that second data store, which then can be selected to replicate workloads too. There's a question about bandwidth throttling. So if you, on a per workload basis on the block-based replication, you can actually set bandwidth throttling capabilities. Again, that's on a per workload level. That type of functionality will be exposed in the Forge interface in future releases as well as starting to do some intelligent throttling and job management. So there's some questions about some questions about being able to get a hold of a demo unit. Again, platespin.com/getforge is a great way to be able to connect with our team. And likely what will happen, this question specifically in Europe, is that we'll then get involved. We'll get one of our local resellers involved with you to work with you locally. Our reseller channel in both North America and Europe, and as well as APAC, are really getting on board with Forge and see it as an exciting opportunity because it is such a unique solution that really solves some core problems that people are having in the mid-sized data center today. There's some questions around pricing, and pricing now that we have multiple models really depends on the model that you're actually looking for. You can protect workloads for around $2,000 a workload is sort of a good sort of number. So depending on whether you're using a 10 or 25 model, and again whether you want the 300 series, so the storage appliance, storage gateway appliance, or the 500 series, the all-in-one appliance. So I do suggest you visit the platespin.com/getforge, register your information. The sales guy would be happy to talk to you about what meets your needs. There's a question about plans to be able to back up Forge 2.0. So how do you actually back up the backup server? So that's a good question. So we've created a few knowledge base articles that talk about some different processes that you can use to actually be able to back up your Forge appliances themselves. So if you visit our knowledge base article, so platespin.com/KB, you'll be able to actually see some of the knowledge base articles about backing up the Forge appliance itself. There's a question, can you have multiple production networks on the device? Yes, you definitely can. So you can register multiple different networks on your environment. So if you've got separate VLANs you want to be able to replicate to, you're able to do that. There's a question about how much RAM does the appliance support? Yeah, that's right. So from a spec point of view, Forge itself ships with dual quad-core 2.6 gig processors. The default configuration is with 16 gigs. You can add in what we call the Enterprise Accessory Pack, which will upgrade you to 32 gigs of memory, as well as give you a spare hard drive and a lights-out control board as well. Okay, some great questions here, so hopefully I'll be able to get through some more of them. We're getting to the top of the hour here, so hopefully we will be able to address some of these questions. There's some duplicates here as well, too. So there's a question here about being upgrade to Generation 2 if you're running Generation 1. So because a lot of the changes that in terms of all the new functionality, they're software changes. So it is actually a fairly simple upgrade process, and you can actually visit our website and download the installer to be able to upgrade your appliance to get all the Generation 2 functionality. Okay, so there's a fantastic set of questions here, which is great, and I don't think we're going to be able to have time to answer all of them. So what I do suggest, if you do have some questions, go visit the platespin.com/getforge. Put your interest in. Someone will reach out directly to you to be able to answer any of your questions. There's a few questions here around support. So the hardware does come with, you buy yearly support for hardware, which also gives you, of course, all the support, maintenance, and upgradability. So for people who have Forge Generation 1, they, of course, can upgrade to Forge Generation 2 and get all the new functionality of Forge Generation 2 by upgrading the software, and that's because they have the maintenance and support plans available as well. Okay, so this is fantastic, and I apologize that we're not able to get to all of the questions that were at the top of the hour now. So again, please go to platespin.com/getforge, register your interest in Forge, and we'll reach out directly to you with answers to your specific questions. So for those of you still online, we've got our draw coming up right now. So if you just hold on 1 second, we're going to do an auto generation of the draw. So just give me 1 second while we do our random pick here. And our winner is Todd Sherwin. So thanks very much, Todd, for joining us in the presentation today, and we'll reach out directly to you to get your contact information so we can send you this GPS navigation system. So thank you very much. Hopefully we've given you some insight into Forge and how you can navigate your way through to a better disaster recovery and availability solution. Thanks for your time today, and please visit our website if you'd like some more information on Forge.